And we'll go like this. All right, screen one, share. Okay, so create. Let's see, which screen am I sharing?
I can see the, now I see your Gmail.
Okay, so back to our assignment here. Let me go get Adobe, pull that down here. Good, all right. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so back in chapter 5, here are the steps of the development process. Clearly define the problem, create the matrix, outline the solution, test the algorithm, translate it into code, run the test, deploy it. So let me just pull up NetBeans, and actually I'll show you this document. Here's how I'll just use the score game function for that. The task was defining the problem is, okay, the game's over, we need to score the game. And there's 2 steps to calculating the score. You have to, in our user story, at the end, there's 2 components to calculating the score. One is calculate the raw score by taking the health of all the trekkers that are still alive, adding that up. Then you add points for any remaining resources that are around and kind of create that raw score. And then based on which occupation you chose, whether it was a banker or a carpenter or a farmer, a banker started out with more money, so presumably he would have
an easier time.
Yeah. So a banker gets no multiplier. A carpenter had, half the money or whatever, and he got a multiplier of 2, and then the farmer got a multiplier of 3. So that's the problem, right?
Okay.
So we've defined the problem. Let's talk about the test matrix. So if I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. There we go. That'll be better. So the test matrix is, and this would also include defining the problem. Would say, okay, what are my inputs? Well, I've got an array of trekkers, and I need to loop through that and figure out if they're all alive and how much health they have. I need to check the mile marker to make sure that they're actually at the end of the trail and not that somehow the game scoring didn't get called, function didn't get called, at independence.
Yeah.
And here's your remaining resources, and that's an array of the supplies they have, and the occupation object that tells me what occupation they had. The validation rules are you have to have somebody alive or the game's over. You have to be at the end of the trail, which is mile marker 2000. And if the raw score has got to be greater than 0, that's kind of a halfway check to say we should get at least that far. If there's a raw score of 0, then everybody's dead and they don't have any resources left. And then you do your multiplier. So here's our test matrix now. Our first scenario is valid, which is I got a trekker health of 27, a mile marker of 2000, a raw score that ended up being 237. My occupation multiplier was 2, multiply 237 by 2, and I should get 474. Invalid scenarios would be trekker health of 0, that means everybody's dead. Or
something like the mile marker isn't at 2000.
Yeah.
So not at the end of the trail.
Not in the trail. You got it. Or my raw score is 0. Something happened in the math up here, and I had a problem calculating the raw score. And I get a raw score, and I have a multiplier of 0. That means I don't know what occupation you had, and we're cooked. So that was it. One thing I did do was these basically take care of all of my out of boundary, because if it's 0 here, then you just got to be below that. So I didn't have a lot of boundaries. He said that I still should have some, but I had a hard time conceiving of when something that would be throwing me that would be higher than like if it's. I guess I should have a boundary test of mile marker is greater than 2,000. That would be a good boundary test, you know.
Yeah.
The next step is to define the algorithm with your pseudocode, right? So trucker health is 0, loop through the array to sum up the trucker health, and then check and say, hey, it's got to be greater than, you know, if trucker health is less than 1, everybody's dead. Or if it's greater than 50, then that's too high because there's only 5 truckers and max health was 10. So that's a boundary check right there. I check and say, hey, if the mile marker is not at 2,000, then you're not at the end of the trail, so keep on trucking and return a -1. That would also cover me if it was greater than 2,000, something's happening and something's not right. My occupation multiplier is a 0, and then I do an if-else ladder to say if you're a banker, be a 1. If you're a carpenter, be a 2. If you're a farmer, be a 3. Resource value, loop through my array of resources and add them up. My raw score is my trucker health plus my resource value. If my raw score is greater than 0, then if my raw score equals 0, then I'm bailing out of here because my raw score has got to be bigger than 0 to proceed.
Yep.
Else, go ahead and do the math to figure out the final score, and I should have a return statement in here to say, go ahead and deliver the score. So now I want to play computer for my theoretical code and make sure it works, and I can basically come in here and create my variables to say, here's my memory positions, and this is what happened. So same kind of thing. Trucker health is a 0, and I've got the mile marker set, but I'm never going to get a raw score set because I exited right there, and so on and so forth for each scenario. So that's the defining the problem. Let's go back here. We've outlined the solution. We tested the algorithm with our pseudocode. Now it's time to actually write code. So let me fire up NetBeans and go to my game control and say, all right, that's my test. Here's game control. And we've created the actual work here of, let me find my score game. There we are. So here's score game. I'm getting a trucker array, a mile marker, a remaining resources array, and a string object of occupation. And I go ahead and define my trucker health as a double, and then I do a for loop and loop through my truckers array up here, and go ahead and add the trucker health, and when I get done, I check it. If the trucker health is equals 0, then return a -1. Then I'm safe to go ahead and check my mile marker. And again, if it's not 2,000, then I'm out of here. Here's my occupation multiplier and my if-else ladder that sets my multiplier. Once I've got this far, then I can go ahead and sum up my remaining resources, loop through that array, and add those up. And that might be 0 because maybe I just came stumbling into Oregon with no food left and no spare wagons and no ammo, and we barely made it. So there's no check to say this better be bigger than 0 because you might be penniless when you get there. That would be hard to imagine, but theoretically possible. The raw score object is a double, and I do the addition of the trucker health object and the total resources object. And now as far as checking if my raw score is greater than 0, I basically did that. Where did I do that? Maybe I forgot to do that. Maybe I forgot to do that. Here's my raw score. I think I ended up deciding that wouldn't I didn't need to do that because I would know that my raw score, if I made it past this Trekker health, if I got that far, I know that I have some health, right?
Okay.
So I didn't bother checking it again because it felt like it was redundant. That's what happened.
Okay.
Here's the math, and I'm returning the score object. So now we can go to our test, which is we go back to Adobe. We're going to run our test cases and verify the code is working as specified. So we go to our test case, and in the test case, let me get to the right one. There we go. I'll close that one. In the test case, the first one is the valid one, and I've got my comments here. And if we go back to my test matrix, we can see that. Let me get down to my test matrix, which is here. And I'll make this a little smaller. Come on, test matrix. Okay. So in my test matrix, my Trekkers is going to equal 27. So I've just made a little notes here to make sure my math is working. My remaining resources, mile marker is going to be 2,000. My remaining resources, if I sum those up, was 210. So 210 and 27 equaled 237. That was my raw score. My occupation multiplier, I'm pumping in a string value of carpenter to get that to work. Oops. And so I should end up with 474. Come down to test case error number 2, which is all my Trekkers have a value of 0, means everybody's dead. So you didn't win. Number 3 is, scroll down, my mile marker is 1800. So I should blow up because of that. Go to test case number 4, and my raw score is going to be 0. And I think what I ended up doing was, I'm sorry. The test case number 4 is my occupation is bad.
Yeah.
And I basically skipped 4 again because test case 4 should never end up happening, because if I made it past the other one, the check on Trek health, I know I'm going to always have some kind of raw score. So I kind of, after actually writing the code, I realized test case 4 wasn't necessary. So 4 becomes 5, and that's my no occupation. So I made an occupation of no such thing, and no occupation found. So let's come back over here and run the game control test. Test the file. It doesn't like I think that inventory control was the one you used, and I must not have pulled it down.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to that one.
Yeah, I'm sure we could fix it quickly, but I'm going to run anyway, and it runs through, and test case 1, all valid. Test case 2, everybody's dead. Test case 3, you're not at the end of the trail, go back to work. Test case 4, I don't know what your occupation is, something happened. So all of our test cases worked, and that is all 7 steps of the changes to the repository. So that's, if you can see, that's Git says I'm good. It's up there. So while I've got the mic, I'm going to go ahead and do one more thing, which is talk about a variable and scope. So that's one of the things in one of our assignments. Mm-hmm. In the game control score game, so the game control controller in the score game method. Thanks. In the score game method, the Trekker health gets created right at the very top of this method and gets referred to in several places throughout here. So this variable has life, and it survives in and out of all these if statements, these select statements, which is another thing we need to talk about. Is here's a Java selection statement of an example of an if, a very simple one where I have one variable I need to check. Then I also have an if else ladder, which is another selection statement where I'm didn't feel like a switch was not necessary, because I knew I was only going to have 3 values, and that could become a switch pretty easily. Moving down, another 20 to 30 lines of code later, I'm still talking to Trekker Health when I go add up my raw score. And then just for fun, right here's where the end of the road for the score game method. So if I try and talk to Trekker Health outside of that method, I'm going to unrim this, uncomment this line. I'm trying to do a quick print line of the value of Trekker Health, and NetBeans tells me, hey, this object doesn't exist. This variable doesn't exist out here because I'm out of scope. Now, if I move that line really quickly, sorry, if I were to move this line just inside these curly brackets and turn it into this one, it should have no problem with it because why doesn't it like that? Unreachable statement. I'm not sure why that's not happy, but Trekker Health is right there working. Oh, I know why it's unreachable. It's because it's below the return. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So there we go. There's Trekker Health being viable right out here. And if I take it back again and put it right out here, it's not viable because as soon as I leave that curly brace, I am now out of scope. So that's an example of how scope works. All right. So if we go back to our assignment here, sorry, let me go back to Chrome. We've talked about, we've walked through the development process. We've used an example of code where we have select statements. Maybe I'll let you take the mic and you can share your screen and show us a switch statement. Here's this one where we walk through our unit test that each of the test cases defined, and we ran it. And then we also just talked about scope. So if you want to talk about up here a switch statement, and then if you'd like to talk about examples of how arguments are passed by value and passed by reference, then I think we've kind of covered the assignment.
Yeah. So, quick question: were we recording that entire time?
So I am. It's actually I've got it. That's why I set up a Google Hangout, and so it'll be recorded up on my YouTube channel. So I'll go ahead and submit the assignment. So this should all be recorded.
Okay. So just making sure that I understand what's going on, because I'm like, oh, this is a long example he's giving me, and I'm like, maybe he's actually recording it.
Yeah. Sorry. No, you're good. Yeah. So I was talking. That's why I was talking a little bit to the camera as well. So.
Okay. To demonstrate,
let me get back to
statements and how the selection statement works. Okay. And then
figure out how to stop sharing my screen here. Let me get over there. All right, stop.
Well, what if I just share my screen?
There you go.
Oh, I guess it just shows me down here in the bottom right. I don't know.
So I stopped sharing. So now you can you got the mic.
Okay. Make sure that my screen is enlarged on your screen, and I suppose
that's good. Now I've got you full screen. That's good.
Okay. So then, was not prepared. But anyways.
Well, I can I can edit edit this part out if you want to take a minute to kind of collect your thoughts. So
no. Well, I'm just thinking for the select statement. Selection statements are the ones that are, for example, let's see, the main code should have one when we're like selecting to get inputs. Correct.
So select statement would be like an if else, or a switch. So
oh, okay.
You find a switch in our code.
Yeah, that's easy. I actually did one for the pace. I developed this one basically kind of using yours as a rough draft because I made some errors and I'm like, okay, where am I going wrong? And it's all in the, what's it called, encapsulation that I always mess up.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, so just going to explain a little bit now on how this switch case is going to work. Basically what's happening here, or It would be really easy if I could like draw a tree diagram right here real quick. I don't even need it to be complex. Just 1 second. Oh, do I have to click it every time? Yes, I do. Okay. But a switch statement, really simply, to kind of put it, is kind of like this tree that we have right here. It starts with one path and it has a certain way that it's going to go. And then with the switch statement, each switch or each case within it is going to be a different road that it can take, a different possibility. So we'll leave behind the other codes at that time, and that code won't be used at that point as we're going down one of the other roads. So in this case, what we have here is in the do action, we have for the switch case, everything, we make it to uppercase so that anything they input doesn't have to necessarily be to uppercase. It'll automatically be taken to it. But with like case S, it'll go ahead and update the pace and set it to steady. And then it'll break or give it a rest before it's called again. Now in case M, it'll do strenuous. Case F, it'll do grueling. In case D, it'll go to the pace explanation, and it'll actually go to a different page and pull up the explanation on what they mean, what they're doing necessarily when they set these different paces, so that they can have a little bit more input on what exactly they're trying to do. And then obviously the Q is going to be the return. So it returns true, and it kind of breaks us out of our little loop here. And then it's going to obviously for default, or not obviously, but what we did is for default, it's always going to be an invalid menu item, because basically anything that is not one of these symbols that we've already captured up here is going to be something that we don't understand, or the computer doesn't understand. It doesn't have a pathway to go down for that. So it's just going to end up being, or it's going to give it back this little message basically saying that you need to try again, that your input wasn't valid. Was that a good explanation then, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So coming back over here, we did the selection statements, and then just walk through the code, unit test, control function, individual gauge, just gonna run the test unit program. Now, I wish that I had actually gone and looked a little bit more at this, because I just assumed that it was kind of the same as last time, but then I started reading it before we met up, and I'm like, oh, this is different than when I took the class last time.
Yeah, so we've done that one. I think let's talk about understanding how arguments are passed by value or passed by reference. Let's kind of work that out.
Okay.
And then I think we'll kind of have it covered.
Okay. So strong understanding how arguments are passed by value. Even though it says each team member, you don't think that I need to do it?
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Maybe you need to go through and you could do the individual or your calculate barrel thing just to make sure we got it covered.
Yeah. Okay. So just making sure we have this covered, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the test statements that we have for the inventory control of calculating the volume of the storage box. So basically, when it runs through this algorithm, it's going to ask us, or it's going to insert into the algorithm the different parameters of height, width, and depth. And it's going to make sure that basically it fits within those different parameters, or that the parameters are fitting within what we're expecting, that the numbers are values that are within, just like I talked about earlier with the switch statement. Basically, it's got a couple different parameters that it's going to understand, and then everything else is garbage. So if it's anything that falls outside of that, it's not going to understand that. So like this one should be good because it's all within our parameters. However, this one has a negative number for the height. This one has a negative number for the width. So those two are going to both fail, which is what we want for these tests, because it basically makes sure that, yes, it's failing correctly. or failing when it's supposed to because they're negative instances and they're not within the parameters that we had set. This one is also going to fail simply because its parameter is too big. The height is 4 when it needs to be less than 3, or well, less than or equal to 3. This one is another test to make sure, this one and this one are both tests to make sure that our limits are okay, that even if it's all 3s or if it's all 1s, that it's going to work, that it's going to, or that because they are our top and bottom. Oh, you can't see my hands right now. Even though they're our top and bottom of it, they're actually going to be within the parameters still. So then it just goes ahead and runs through the different parameters within there by calling the different variables and making sure that it receives an expected result within the parameters of, well, basically this just says to that degree. So make sure it's correct to the nth degree or whatever. Anything else with that one, or?
No, I think that works.
Okay. I wonder why it is failing right now though with inventory control instance.
It looks like to me like that chunk of code's missing. The actual control code isn't there. And I wondered if you know how you moved it from we had two kind of different branches in our Git repository, and
yeah,
you brought it over to the Oregon Trail one. I'm wondering if it
got left behind.
Got left behind because as you look up there in the tree, you know, I don't see it anywhere in there.
Yeah, it was supposed to be in the control one, and then inventory control was supposed to be in here.
Yeah.
Oh well. It demonstrates the
time.
It did work before, yes, and I could probably dig through the code that I have saved to my computer and find it, but
yeah,
it's not waste time. Anyways, each team member and then walk through a code and concept of scopes and lifespan. Oh, you did that. And then create examples and explain a strong understanding of how arguments are passed by values and passed by reference. Okay. So for this one, I think I'll use, actually, I think I'll use yours for this one. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So you had good examples of this for, now that I think about it, the barrels is a good example of it too, but. Values being passed into something else.
So even our
I mean, everything is kind of an example of it, but I want a good example of it that's easy to understand, you know?
You could go to the game control one and look at that score game guy.
Okay.
That's a good example.
Let's see. Score game right here.
Yeah.
Yep, this is a good example. Okay. So now we're going to explain, just so you have somewhere to edit from. Now we're going to explain how we understand how arguments are passed by value and passed by reference. So essentially, what's going on here is we have a public double score game. We've created a method. And in this method, we have, I always use method and object interchangeably. I don't know if that's correct, but it has a couple different parameters inside of it that basically need to be filled out. We've already kind of set up what they need to be earlier on, but this one says that it needs to have checkers, a mile marker, a remaining resources, and a string occupation. Now, for those four, it's going to need an input of some sort, or it's going to go and basically find it, find where the checkers are, and going to find if it's a double, which it should be, and insert the number that is that it needs to find. Same thing with the mile marker. It's going to find the number and it's going to insert it. Now it's going to do that for all of them except for string occupation, in which case it's going to actually find the string and then it's going to insert it. Once it inserts it, it's going to bring it down, basically all the information that we have, and it's going to put it through all the checks that we have here. And it's going to, this is especially where it's going to start to be used, and right down here. It's finding out what is the value for, in this case, a banker, carpenter, or farmer. It's trying to find which one it is and what value is that giving to our occupational multiplier, because the whole point of everything that we have up here is we want to take it and we want to put it into our final score method or object. So basically we're going to take the raw score, which was calculated. Let's see. Did we calculate the raw score earlier, or is this the first time seeing it?
Right down there. Yep.
Okay. So the raw score, this is the first time seeing it, but oh yeah, I see. I got it backwards. Anyways, the raw score is going to be made up of these two things that we have here, which is a total resources and Trekker health. These each are going to have a value passed into them from where they found it earlier on, where it references the Trekker health and the total resources. It's going to pass those values into here and then going to go ahead and add them together to give us a raw score. And then for our score double, or our double score, which is basically our final score, it's going to take that raw score that we had, which was right up here. We just took it and placed values into the 2 to get the 1. Now we have the 1, and we have the occupation multiplier, which we talked about just a second ago. It's going to apply it to the raw score and then add it together to yield the result of the score. So what we want the user to see in the end. Anything that I should cover in addition to that, or that you feel like I didn't explain very well?
Yeah, I think I would add, if I may, and when I start talking, then I don't know if I think it's still recording your screen.
Yeah,
my face or your screen. So if you were to, what it's asking about is, I think it wants us to make the distinction between passing by value and passing by reference. So you alluded to it, but to put a finer point on it. For example, Trekker health gets assigned a value on 34, and then that value gets altered in the for each, or in the for loop on 35 through 37, right?
Yep.
And that reference to that number is we're referencing Trekker health. And so scroll down now to to line 63. When we calculate raw score, we're referencing Trekker health and total resources. So we're doing addition on a reference and not a value. The distinction is that Java doesn't do that when you're passing value to methods. So if you go up to the signature for our line 31 on our score game signature, even though I have the word Trekkers in here inside the parens and mile marker and remaining resources and I'm calling it occupation, that's not what's really passed to it. It's actually passed. So when I call that method out there, what really gets sent over the wire, if you will, to the score game is mile marker is going to be a number. It's going to be a double, and it's not going to be a reference. And that's the difference between passing references and values. When it's streaming into this method, it's actually the real values that are coming in. And like you said, that's being assigned to a reference called mile marker, but what gets passed to the method is the actual value, not a variable called mile marker, So yes. What gets sent over there is the actual value, not the variable.
Thank you for that. And that's a good point, or a good distinction to make. I'll just add one more thing is basically what you were saying. They're kind of like bookmarks or references when we say Trekkers or mile marker. There's a real value out there. The game works, or the computer knows what real values are, and it goes and gets the real value and then passes it through. Is that a weird explanation?
Yeah, that's right. And when I'm calling the score game method, I don't have to use a variable called mile marker in my call for that. I'm going to be passing the number, like you said, the computer will pass the number of whatever the value of the mile marker object is, and instead of the reference to it. So that's the distinction I think they're looking for. So
Okay. Well, thank you for helping clarify that. Is there anything else that you feel that we should go over a little bit more in depth, or that we haven't covered? Or?
I'm looking at that. I'm thinking we just about have it, because I think that's about it. So
Okay.
we've talked about scope and lifespan. We've talked about arguments passed by value and by reference. We've talked about our test matrices and our test codes. We covered if else, and switch, and went through the development process. So I think we've got it covered.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you, teacher, for joining us today.
Yeah. All right, I will edit this and get it turned in.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Now I had a quick question for you, though.
Yeah.
I had earlier today, because I meant to do this yesterday, and I believe it or not, I got sick. I got what's called vertigo.
Yeah.
I get it 2 times a year. Where, you know, that sensation where you spin around really fast and then stop and the room kind of shakes a little bit for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does that constantly without stop.
That's
and yeah, it's not fun. It basically causes me to vomit and not be able to do anything like walk, because I have no balance. The entire world is just shifting before my eyes. Like I can try to focus on something and you can see my eyes darting back and forth, like, you know, they don't work right. Anyway, so I got that again just yesterday, but good thing my dad came over and gave me a blessing and told me that basically I'd be better in the morning, and I was. So
that's awesome.
It went away. Well, for the most part, I've got a little bit of it still, but I worked on this just today, and I was reading, to make a short story long, basically. I was reading over our game pace that I had made. I made it in pace menu view. And when it displays the menu, we kind of have that idea going on right up here for the public enum pace type. But it's not necessarily displaying it as a menu. Is it okay if I take this pace type and turn it into a menu like we have for the other ones? Or do you want me to directly reference to the public enum? Or
well, I think, you know, you can just, I mean, you can take that and copy it over to your view, because we don't have the code basically built for the model to say, go get me the value of that, right? So I think in the separation of the view and the model layer, you know, theoretically the right way would be is to say, hey, I've got to, I'm just going to go reach out and grab that object and have them tell me. But I had the same problem with
rations.
With rations, exactly, saying, hey, I should know what my ration types are. There's only 4 of them, and I would, you know, again, theoretically would be building that menu by grabbing those values out of the model layer, instead of hard coding them in the, because the idea is I might be referencing that in different places. So you want your, you know, you want that to live in one spot so you can edit it once and have it fixed everywhere.
Yeah.
But we don't have the code really working to go grab the stuff out of there. I suspect that will be coming later. So I did the same thing. I basically left the enum alone and just hard coded it in the view with a kind of, I think I made a comment that said, I'll go get this later, you know, once we kind of build out the program. So
okay. So yeah, that's I'll go ahead and do that. I'll leave it alone, but create an additional menu on top of it and then turn that in tonight. because he still has allowed me to turn it in until tonight. So that's nice
good.
of him.
That's good.
Anyways, sharing screen, back to me.
All right.
Face. But yeah, I think that's it for today. You have it all recorded and everything, right?
Yeah. So I'll take the clips that make sense and get that thing turned in. I'm gonna try and get it turned in tonight so that I can have a normal Saturday. So that's
Sounds
the plan.
good. Hey, I appreciate that because last time I did this project, it was me using OBS to capture the screen. I don't know how you do this on air thing. I looked it up online and they said Google Hangouts on air doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. You have to. It's basically you go into YouTube. Like if you have a YouTube channel, you go into the Creator Studio, go over to live streaming, and create a live event, and it's Google Hangout on air. I had to set it up for my other class, so.
Oh, but it doesn't let me on mine. I have to, in order to do it, it took a long time, but literally I have to open up like the code on the right-hand side of the page and make it enabled so I can click the button. Because otherwise the button is not clickable.
That's funny.
That's
funny. Well, okay, yeah. So I was just gonna, if that didn't work, I was just gonna record it with. I've got Camtasia, so I was gonna use that, but I think this will. It'll as soon as I stop broadcasting, it'll actually stick it up on my YouTube channel, and I can then start, editing it. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'd just like to give you a personal thanks for being my partner. You really are on top of it and know what you're doing, and I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, likewise. It's we're getting there. So this class has been kind of frustrating for me because the course material is so crappy that it's so poorly written and it doesn't make sense from week to week. I mean, it doesn't sync. That the first few weeks I was just like, this is stupid. But I feel better now than I did 3 weeks ago. So
yeah, it's a course made for people who already know how to write Java code, and it's just giving them a big long project.
Yeah, really. That's
class for learning.
That's what I thought. Is I don't think that any professor who actually manages this class has gone through and read this with the view of the eye of a student, because there's so many things in this curriculum that don't make sense, that are contradictory, or he says in there the opposite of what you're supposed to do. And, it's like, holy cow, So I said something about it in the forum and sounded like a whiner, and so I thought I'm just going to stop saying anything. But so.
No, I get you. Anyways, thanks again, and you have a great night, man.
You bet. We'll see you.
See ya.